You have to believe that whenever you confront a challenge, whether it's a health challenge, a relationship challenge, or any type of challenge that you have to, first thing you have to do is just, is it possible that there is an answer to this? Going from cause and effect. And if you can just open that door a little bit, just to say, okay, but maybe I don't see it. It's hard to find. Most people are like, there's no answer to this. But what if I said to you, well, if you could just believe there's a 10% chance that there is an answer out there. So it's I call it cracking the door open on the belief.
Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Hi, Wild Souls. Today, I would like to welcome Christopher Miller, who goes by CJ, to the show. CJ, you've been on the scene for a while. You have done some things in the past, Rainmaker, advertising, urban artist market, but more currently, you have written a book, The Spiritual Artist, a very cool book, by the way. I love the graphics and I do love the content. And you host the Spiritual Artist podcast. And you've been spending more time doing speaking engagements and hosting more workshop type of things. So I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Well, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So, CJ, in the spiritual community, there has been a significant amount of talk about awakening, evolution of humanity, and events people are experiencing related to all of these shifts. Something that's really interesting that's been coming up more recently is the topic of embracing our imagination as creator beings, and that embracing our imagination is going to play a much stronger role as we move forward with these events. You coined a term, creative intelligence. I love it. Can you tell me more about creative intelligence?
Oh, I love it. Thank you for bringing that up. Let me give the listeners a little background. I've been painting since the year 2000, doing artwork, and during COVID, I kind of sat down and I had morning pages. Most people write morning pages as journaling, probably from 8 years of writing morning pages. And during COVID, I decided to kind of reread those morning pages, and I wrote a book out of it. And the term creative intelligence, for me, I think I'm kind of slowly moving away from a lot of the traditional religious terms or dogma terms. And I think trying to be more inclusive, and I see spirituality as something that everybody has access to a spiritual essence. And so when we tap into that, what I call the source, or what some might, everybody has a different name for it. Some people might call it Muhammad, Buddha, Mother Nature, Jesus Christ, or whatever. When we tap into that essence, that is a creative intelligence. And what I describe that as is there's one common denominator about our existence here, is that we're creators. We create things. And so a lot of people say, well, I'm not an artist. I don't do art. Well, I'm not talking just about, the traditional artists with canvas, although that's what I do. I'm talking about the artistry of your life. How do you create your relationships, your job? And also, how do we create a better planet? How do we create this? You talk about awakening. How do we create a planet that works for everybody, that has natural resources that are shared equally and that are refurbished? And how do we create that? So creative intelligence is that aspect that we can all tap into that flows through us when we create. So I hope that explains it.
No, I loved it. And I agree that we are we're in a time where we're going through a major shift. Technology, new advances are on the forefront, and I think that things are going to start happening pretty quickly in very positive ways. You say, trust that your creative intelligence will deliver. I love that you move it into everyday life. So if we're thinking about being creator beings, creating our reality in the present moment and the future, like our imagination is really significant to go beyond what we know, but imagine other things. I feel like you have mentioned in the past that you've talked about the value of being a child. And I feel like children have just such pure imagination and that we get socialized out of that. And as we're growing spiritually, some thoughts about how we can tap back into that in our adult life and really grasp that pureness of imagination to create a better lives for ourselves personally and for the greater good.
Right. Right. I do think that one of the exercises I do, you were mentioning earlier that I have moved into doing spiritual art retreats where I bring a bunch of artists together and teach them not just how to be creative, but how to be conscious creators. You know, Eh,
Ah,
so
that's big.
yeah, how are they being conscious? Well, the thing is, I've talked to people and they say, "Well, I'm not a creator," and I said, "Everybody, we all create." And so, but it's, do you create consciously? Are you aware of what you're creating? Are you thinking about your thought? Are you aware of your thoughts? Are you examining your belief systems? Are you kind of taking the time to step back and watch yourself? You know, Eckhart Tolle says to be the watcher, right? To watch yourself. And so, when we step back and watch ourselves, I do think we get more like a child. You know, it's that impulse. You get down to the intuitive impulse of creativity. And so I had these bands printed up. I don't know if the listeners, but the band says listen,
Oh, I love that. I
and it's the
probably need
spiritual
to be
artist.
wearing that for
Yeah.
myself.
Well, because it's what we all should practicing listening. And by listening, and there's twofold, right? Obviously listening to each other, which is a big issue today, right?
Yes, definitely.
Listening to each other in love, and then also listening to that voice, that creative intelligence that's behind all things, that's speaking to you through the spirit, and listening to that. And you know, we were talking earlier about following that impulse. You know, if you get quiet and just listen, you know, children do that all the time, right? They're impulse creatures. They they sit there and go, oh, I want that ice cream. They go get the ice cream, and they follow the impulse. And it is taken out of us a bit, you know. Society and consciousness of our environment, where we're born, where we're raised, the belief systems, the religion that we're raised in, they all come down and they kind of hamper us into what they think, to certain rules and regulations. Now, there's a place for rules and regulations, but also that creative impulse. Sometimes you have to step back from it and say, is this regulation serving me? Right? And if it's not serving you, let it go. And that's how you become a conscious creator, you know?
Well, that is so timely. I think one of the things that I'm hearing that's really important is the conscious versus the unconscious, because I agree with you. We're all creators. We're creating every moment of our life, whether we recognize that we put intention and attention to different topics that we create consciously or unconsciously. That's why people see a lot of repeated behaviors and then they can consciously work themselves out of it, right?
Right.
So you said that you do workshops. Can you give like a practical tip or a practical example of how someone can consciously maybe do something to embrace their creativity?
That's a good question. I would think consciously it's about learning okay, so I like to teach the concept, my concept of what I think spiritual is. There's so many different definitions of spirituality, and so I do like to share with people that spirituality, spirit, is the place other than manifestation. So there's really only two states that surround us, right? There's the spiritual realm, and then there's the physical realm. This desk, the microphone I'm talking into, the computer I'm looking at. So everything that's ever created is in the spiritual realm first, and then we draw it forth into the manifested world. So everything that's created is spiritual. And so when I say spiritual artist, I want you to start realizing that the things that are unseen, your thoughts, your feelings, you know, I can't hand you a box of love. It's not tangible, right?
Mm.
But it exists. Love exists. And so spiritual artists, I teach them, the first thing I teach them when I talk about accessing your creativity is to realize that there are two stages to the creative process. The first stage is the unmanifested, the world of possibilities, the world of that creative intelligence. And it is endless, right? There's endless possibilities. At one time, there was no such thing as a Zoom call, right? I mean, we all saw how these Zoom calls and internet and conference calls popped up with COVID, because suddenly it was out there. The idea was always there, but suddenly we drew it forth out of need. So a spiritual artist, what I like to teach them to do is to start listening to that voice and realizing that they have a half of them, part of them, a large part of them is spiritual. It's comprised of their feelings, their emotions, their spiritual essence. And so it's kind of I find it's so funny when I teach the workshop, there's so many different ways to begin, right? There's so many different ways to begin. But I do want them to start on the aspect of starting to understand that there's a spiritual realm, realizing that their thoughts do affect their lives. If I sit there and think, I can't paint, guess what?
You're not going to be able to paint.
And we have to, and it's so funny in our society, right? Especially here in the West, we are so focused on the manifest. We look at things. We look at this painting is bad. This paintbrush is bad. But if we focus on the spiritual, that's when the creation happens. That's when the movement happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So a lot of it is realizing and acknowledging that it's out there, and then it's putting some action to it. So another component that I believe that you talk about is the importance of embracing our emotions. And I think embracing emotions can be really scary for some people at times and create a lot of uncertainty. Some thoughts on that?
Yeah. Emotions it is tricky. We try to hold back from them. And so when I teach art and creativity, I teach people that emotions are a tool that we use. And, it's so funny you say this, Sandra. When I first did my book, I didn't even address emotions. The first version of my book was all mental.
Interesting.
And I had to go back
as humans.
Yeah. Because I didn't want to address that. It's like, I don't want to think about emotions. That's not part of me, but it is part of me. Emotions are part of us, but they're not us. And so I love that you brought emotions up, because it's kind of where I've been the last year or two. I did a special show. I did an art show dealing with emotions recently. And what I did is I did a series of paintings combined with a song, a very emotional song. So when you came to my show, you had to listen to the song while you looked at the painting.
Oh, wow.
And what I wanted people, isn't that cool? Yeah. But I purposely did it so that they weren't all good feeling songs. Some of the songs were sad, some were angry, some were frustrated. And it was called the emotional roller coaster, because I wanted people to feel really, really happy, and then really, really angry, and then really defiant, and then really sad, and then really spiritual, like almost like an awe moment, a moment of awe. And so I picked all these different kinds of music that would take them on a roller coaster. So what I like to teach people about emotions is they're a tool for us. Emotions are a tool. And if you resist them, they will hold into you. You've heard the term maybe pain body. Have you heard the term pain body? Yeah. So you have to let them go through. I interviewed Terry Martin in my book. He is an actor, an artistic director. And he says emotions, they're energy. They're a form of energy in motion. So you have to let that energy go through you. If not, it will make you sick. It will make you unhealthy. It will bring dis-ease. But if you let it flow through you, and so I know if someone's listening to this and they're having a hard time, and I know maybe someone in their life that they very much love has passed away, or they're sick, or they're struggling with an illness. It's not always fun, but it's necessary. And when we experience those emotions, I came upon this studying some Buddhism traditions. It gives us the ability to connect with others. I've had a health issue recently, and I realized that I can't fix it. Usually I can just take a pill, but it's a health issue that I can't fix. But what it's done is it's created sympathy for me, for everybody else. And so when I meet someone who's struggling with whatever disease or issue, it reaffirms my humanity and my love for them, that we're in this together. We're all together and we all feel these emotions. And sometimes it's just not fun. So it builds compassion.
I love how you bring the value to of it and how it helps us evolve.
Right.
Helps us evolve as unique beings, as a person, as well as it helps evolve more of a smaller collective in humanity. So thank you for being really authentic and sharing that.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I asked really early on, probably for the first year of the podcast that I'm bringing on, is can you tell me a little bit about your spiritual journey? And did you have a moment of coming out of the spiritual closet? I know in previous shows I talked a lot about my own personal coming out of the spiritual closet. And on the one show, I was like, I thought I was out of the spiritual closet. And then I had some guests and talking, because part of Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious is to bring a wide array of guests onto the show who have a lot of different modalities and thoughts on things. I know I love on your podcast, you have such a breadth of different guests that you bring in from so many different demographics. I love it. In fact, there was a couple I think I might reach out to that I saw on your show. So nice job with the diversity on it. It was a beautiful thing. But what I realized was I was uncomfortable asking some of these questions or bringing up some of these topics. And clearly I was not out of the spiritual closet like I thought I was. And it was a moment to reflect and grow personally. Do you have any personal experiences with that?
Well, I think what I would tell you is, I do hear a lot of that, people saying that I had a spiritual awakening. And I think what I would say, it's not a spiritual awakening. It's a realization. It's a mental realization, because we can't stop being spiritual beings. We never were not spiritual beings.
Fact.
Right. And so even when, people say, and I'm like, well, no, but we do have what I love to use the analogy of an onion, right? There's always a deeper layer to unravel. And so I love the title of your podcast. So let's talk about the word curious, right? It's about being curious to your spiritual essence. And so when you're curious and you let yourself take another layer of that onion off and go, oh, I didn't realize it, but I have a block here. I have a belief system that's stopping me from reaching out to these people or those people. And it's just peeling an onion off, just keep peeling. And so, like you said, staying in that place of curiosity, right? That's interesting. How does that affect? I call it my little me, little Chris. I say my spiritual Chris, and I'll say little Chris is threatened by that.
That's actually a great way to explain it.
Yeah. And so when I think about little Chris, I think about the material Chris. The physical manifestation of Chris is threatened when that woman cut him off in traffic. That made him angry. And I have to acknowledge it and say, okay, little Chris, I hear you. I hear that made you angry. But what is the bigger spiritual truth of the situation? And there's in that case, the truth of the situation might be that woman is sick or needs to get to a hospital or has an emergency in her life. And it's very important that she gets there before me. And so when I get to that spiritual plane, see, when I take everything onto the spiritual plane, consider it in the spiritual realm, and then see how it outpictures in the physical realm. And then I go, okay, I can let her go, right? She was rude. She could have been nicer about it, and I'll let her go. And so little Chris, I acknowledge the feelings, like you just said with emotions, acknowledge that little Chris is upset, but then step back and look at it from the spiritual perspective.
Yeah, that's a perfect story. And I feel like the majority of the listeners out there all relate to the driving issues in an event happening. I used to early on call it love, not love, when I would get into my response that may not have been so nice. And I'd be like, love or not love, that's really not love. And sort of do a very similar kind of walkthrough with my emotions and thought process of that and letting it go and really not owning the other side of it. I can own my side of it, but not the other side of it. And how do I want to present myself, not only to the world, but to
You
myself?
froze.
How do I want to present myself to myself? What does that look like? So nice with that. That being said, it seems like we're on a bit of a wild ride globally, in the world. Your thoughts on how the listeners can stay more in a space of peace and balance with not getting caught up in all this external craziness that's going on?
Are you there? It's freezing up.
Well, hey, CJ, that was the first. To everyone listening, the original recording with CJ Miller here was cut short with an unanticipated tornado that just happened to pass through Wild Spirit Farms as we were in the middle of our conversation. And it really was a robust conversation. This time I will be 100% engaged. This time when I went through the other recording to see if any of it was salvageable, it really is good. So I do want to do a continuation with that. CJ, where I record, I can see out the front facing window of where I'm at, and I could see these really unusual dark clouds that were rolling in, and they sort of caught my eye off to the side. And then the next thing that happened was it got like really loud in here with the rain and the noise. And all I kept thinking was, can they hear this on the recording? Am I going to be able to edit this out of the recording? Like, is everyone else hearing like what I'm hearing here? Which, interestingly enough, you don't hear in the recording what I was hearing on the backside, which was shocking. So these headphones really do make a difference. But what was really interesting to me was part of the early conversation was about being present and listening. You have those armbands, listen.
Yes.
And they really caught my attention. And because I said it's something that I have an issue with. And I thought this is a prime example of, sometimes we try so hard to stay present and be part of it. When there's distractions creeping in, we act as if they're really not happening instead of taking a pause and saying, hey, something's happening here. And, the next thing I knew, I was out of the studio, the power was out, tornado sirens were going on to seek immediate coverage, that there was a tornado warning. And honestly, by the time I had to process it all, it was all over with. And I'm very, very grateful that Wild Spirit Farms and myself have been very safe, other than the no power for a couple of days, which we managed through. And certainly I want to send a lot of love and peace out there to folks who did not have the same experience that I did in the middle of this. So welcome back.
Welcome back. It's funny. Yeah, you started freezing and then you disappeared. I was like, no, I was loving where we were going. But
well, so
yeah,
it's interesting. The question that I was asking as this was all happening was, it seems to be that we're in a bit of a wild time globally, and that there's a lot happening in the world, and obviously a lot happening locally for a lot of people. So my question is, what are some thoughts that you might have on how we can stay in a place of peace and balance in the craziness of this world? Different things work for different people. So we're trying to put a lot of things out there for the listeners, those of us who have really feel like we're spiritual teachers here to make a difference.
That's a really wonderful and timely question. I am part of a prayer group, and we meet at my house once a month. And I was really upset with some of the global things that are happening right now. And so when I asked for prayer, I was focused on that. And it is hard. It can be challenging to remember the spiritual side of you, the spiritual essence of you, when so much is happening all over the globe. It feels like, just aggression, this dominant energy of take land, take over, take this place all over the globe, with leadership. And even in America, we're seeing a battle for things like that. So I've been myself processing, how do I do that? How do I take stock and stay grounded and stay at peace? And a lot of people, obviously there's meditation, and meditation is a catch-all for everybody. There's also a yoga that I do, and I really do believe that our body can bring us peace when our mind is not. So I'll repeat that. Our body can heal our mind. See, here in the West, we think that we can only change things by physically changing our thoughts. But sometimes if we just ignore our thoughts, but go and do some movement, some Pilates, some yoga, the movement of our body actually shifts the energy in our mind. And it changes our thoughts without a conscious direction. It just changes the way we think. And I think there's a lot of room for growth in that. And I think we're going to hear more and more about the importance of your body. See, in the West, we kind of, right, we're separate. We really don't believe in our bodies.
Yeah, the whole separate concept is what's creating a lot of the difficulties with people moving into their spiritualness, is
Right.
just
And
that mindset of separate. You're the first person who has spoke it that way.
yeah,
It's coming
yeah.
from a whole different direction, but we're a whole. That's part of being the oneness.
Right. And here, so many, and there's many religions that have consciously separated the body from the mind. Everything of the body is sinful, sexual relationships, feeling, all that is sinful, and it's all up here in the cerebral, but we're one being. We are all spirit, mind, and body. And so I really love that. And I've talked, I think it was in the earlier interview about, I added a chapter on emotions and I added a chapter on body. And so when I teach my students that, I teach them that we bring our whole bodies to the creative process. And when I say the creative process, I mean how you make your life, how you build your life. So if you're not in touch with your body, if you don't listen to your body, it will affect how you outpicture creatively in your life. The kind of life you live, the energy you have towards certain tasks, all that comes. So I want to add one more component. That was a really good question. that I really want to focus on, and I've really come to terms with what am I as a spiritual artist. And it's because, so when all these things happen, I would say go to the spiritual level. So when you're troubled by something, go to the spiritual truth of the situation. And sometimes the spiritual truth, are you familiar with that term?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I was feeling very frustrated and dark and disconnected about global events. I'll be honest with you, I donated money to the food group that actually was delivering food to Palestine. And
Nice.
this week there was that accidental bombing and 7 of the volunteers. And it just broke my heart, because here these people are doing, like, living in the light, right? They're living in the light. They're just looking at the basic truth here that people need to eat, and we need to honor all people. And that service, by the way, that organization, it has come to America during, I believe they were here during Katrina. They've been all over the globe. In Germany, they've been in Israel. Now they're in Palestine feeding people. And so when that occurred, it really did pull me from center. But so I focused on the spiritual truth. And the spiritual truth, which is one you just said, we are all one. We are all connected. And so whatever's happening, the spiritual truth is that there is one connection. It is that, and I believe it's driven by love, right?
Of course.
And so I'll tell you what, I just went outside before this call, and spring is hitting us here, and everything is so green. It's that chartreuse green. And
I love it.
right? And the birds are making nests and the flowers are coming up, and such amazing things, right? Just when you look at even a weed, we call it a weed. It's beautiful. The way, the forming of the thistle, the way it grows, the shaping of the leaves, that power, that source is a spiritual truth. There is this power of creativity and expansion and growth in every animal, every species, every tree on this planet has that power, And so learning to recognize it. So when I get pulled from center, I think I go to my body sometimes. I do meditation. First I go to my mind, which is meditation. Then I'll do my body, which is physical movement. Sometimes just dancing, sometimes yin. But the third is to go to the spiritual truth and sit down and think, what is this? What do I know is the truth behind the existence that we have right now?
And the one truth I know is that everything has this expulsion of love in it, this creative drive that wants to live. And I was just outside, there's little baby ducklings. I live on a creek, little
Okay.
baby ducks, and they're just sitting there and they're drilling in the water and eating the moss. Such focus, right? Just this focus toward life. So a spiritual truth is everything has a focus towards life. And when I focus on the ending of life or the death of life, or I'm only seeing one side of it. And so then I have to step back and say, the truth is there's still birth and love and children and joy and innocence. And there is also the other side, right? So I don't know if that overwhelmed your question, but I love it.
No, I love it, and there's two other pieces that I'll add to that.
Oh, good.
The other piece is sometimes we can feel a lack of control or a lack of power or a lack of ability to influence or make a difference. And I believe each of us always has the power to influence or make a difference. Even if we just sit back and we're sending, love, light from a heartfelt place of healing or whatever, it makes a difference. It's real. It's energy, it's vibration. It's real. It goes out there. So even from our little, wherever we're at in our existence in the world, we can still make a difference. And I think that that's important in our humanness, and that in our singularity, our single expression of who we are. We still have this need a lot of times to be able to influence and make a difference and not feel helpless. When you were talking about the body, I recently did a show with Rebecca Beneteau, and it was called Sexuality Intersects Spirituality. And she talks a lot about that with the body, how religions and different practices have always told us to let go of our body and leave it behind, that it's not part of who we are, it's not part of the spirituality. And she challenges everyone, what if we can bring our body along with us? Our body was part of the creation of the all that is, or whatever we choose to call that other power that made that. It's not separate, and that there is value in it. So she did a really nice job with it in that show. It was a good interview. So
Yes, I totally agree. And I love that. I think one of my biggest steps, you talk about, I think you asked me this, so spiritual awakening
yes,
is realizing when you sit down and think about it mentally even, but you think about the concept of one great power, and you also consider the concept of like quantum physics, how once objects are connected, they're always connected, even if they're separated. Everything around us, you can't say there's no duality. It's all
no.
connected. Everything, the air, the people, the plants, the animals, those ducks, our bodies. We can't, that's a dualistic thinking, is to think, oh, no, that's over here, and that's on the material plane, and I don't know, it's part of us. It's part of what we are. Yeah. So I
Well,
love it.
it's part of why we're here on Earth. The body's part of the experience. It's all experiential, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from our bodies,
100%. So
Yeah.
you had mentioned, you talk about disbelief and belief, and that you have like a 3-step process you use from moving from disbelief to belief. I think the first is you crack the door open, then you claim a similar experience from the past,
Mm.
and then you do multisensory visualizations. Could you walk me through an example of that? Like, how does that feel? How does it look?
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. It's funny. I do remember I have that in my notes, and it's something it's not on the top of mind, but I do. The first step when you're looking at a belief. So here I'll give you an example. I took during COVID, I had to take and I say had to because my business went static with people not mingling. I did art shows, art festivals. Well, people weren't doing
Oh,
that. So
right.
I took a corporate job, and they sat me down. They hired me and sat me down at the computer. There was absolutely no training, by the way. Yeah, Sandra, no training at all. They just sit you down and say, go to work. And I was sitting there going, how do I do this? And this is where I realized the first step, when I say crack the door open,
The first step is to acknowledge that the answer is out there. You have to believe that whenever you confront a challenge, whether it's a health challenge, a relationship challenge, or any type of challenge that you have to, first thing you have to do is just, is it possible that there is an answer to this? Going from cause and effect. And if you can just open that door a little bit, just to say, okay, but maybe I don't see it. It's hard to find. Most people are like, there's no answer to this. Well, what if I said to you, well, if you could just believe there's a 10% chance that there is an answer out there. So it's I call it cracking the door open on the belief. And so I sat there at the computer and I realized the first step for me to do this job was believing that this incredible world around me had all the information. It was on my computer. It was out there and I could find it. And if I could believe that just somewhere, and like YouTube became my friend, right? I would go, how do I do this application? Google it on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And there's a video right there brought to me. So first I had to believe it was possible. Then I had to see, the other thing is, like you said, look at previous examples in your life. So in this case, I'd go back and say, when else did I feel like I was up against the wall with no opportunities and that all of a sudden there was an answer? And you go back and you start going, okay, when I was young and I was trying to get through that program and I was so terrified about that final test because I don't test well or whatever, but I did. I tested well and I got through it. That's where you stretch that belief into you have case studies, you have samples in your life. We all have them, you know. So if somebody's listening to this and they're wanting to meet a significant person, first, they have to believe there has to be in this great big world other people out there that can match with me. Then they have to go, okay, when have I been? I have been in love before. And even if they can say, I was in love with my dog, I had the best dog in the world. We were just, right? That's the second step to that believing. And I was trying to remember what you said the third step was that I wrote in that note.
Oh, yeah, no worries. The third step is that you do multisensory visualizations with it. Take your sip.
I take my sip of my coffee. So what that is that's you. It's called, I was trained through Center for Spiritual Living, but it's called creating a mental equivalent. So you have to see it in your mind's eye. So what they tell you is if you desire, like for this, if I'm sharing this with the listener, if you're trying to meet the special someone, I want you to close your eyes and see that person in your mind's eye. What do they look like? How tall are they? Where are they at? Where are you at with them? And then I want you to go, when I say a multisensory, I want you to go through your 5 senses. So as you sit there, what would it feel like to be hugging that person? What would it feel like to see that person? What would it be like to hug that person? What would it be like to touch that person? What would they feel like? And just feel it. And even if you go like this, right? If you can't see this, I'm putting my hands around my arms and just hugging myself. Oh, that's what it would feel like if I was in love, and you go through, what would they say to me? What would that person say to me? What would I hear them saying? I support you. I'm here for you. And imagine hearing it. So you go through all of your senses, and we even get down to taste. What would it be like? Right. What would that taste like to you? And that's the fun one. But when we go through the senses, we drive home that intention. We set up where we're going to go. And then I believe that life, that creative intelligence that we talked about, it brings it. I won't tell you how. You won't know how. You don't have to direct how. All you have to do is crack open the door, look back at situations when you successfully did something like it, and then feel it through all 5 of your senses, and it will happen. It will happen quickly.
Beautiful. Those are really important words. I appreciate you. That was very descriptive and it's very actionable. So that's a lot of times folks feel like they don't have something actionable.
Well, I love these questions. You're asking me better questions than I've had in a long time. It's very fun.
Good. Well, because it all goes back to that imagination. And as we're moving and evolving and really actively creating this new world to move out of a lot of the yucky duality stuff that we touched upon, it really does take on embracing that imagination and getting into the creativity of that. Now, you touched on, you were talking about the ducks and the ducklings, and I was like, those are the things that sort of sometimes can just set me back out of all the chaos in life. and I can get totally lost in the moment. So I have these goats here, and I recently had some goat kids, and they're out running around and jumping, and they're just as silly as can be. And what I find is that I can get caught up in things that I feel like might be stressing me or weighing on me. And then I catch them out of the corner of my back window, not my front window. And I'll go out on the porch and I'll just like think that I'm going to watch them for a minute, and it'll be 5 or 10 minutes. And it just totally resets everything within me internally. Like it brings me back to center. What is your thought about leveraging nature with spirituality?
Oh, for me, nature is so key to my spirituality. And I what I heard in your voice, and what I would like to nudge in your thinking, is I heard a sense of guilty pleasure, like you felt that it was
Ah,
wrong. And so I want you to shift that and say, no, no, I am going to stretch those moments longer and longer and longer. When you feel that, I call it a moment of awe. When they're out there and they're in that play, I want you to just sit there and feel that gratitude, and feel that gratitude as long as you can. So I don't want you to have any guilt about it, because that's exactly where creativity happens.
that was a good
In
call
that
on your
place.
part.
Yeah. In that place of watching them, when you feel appreciation and gratitude and love, that's when spirit talks to you the clearest. That's when suddenly you'll be sitting out there, and suddenly you'll go, you might be wrestling a problem for weeks, and you let yourself feel that, you let yourself be in that space, that middle space. Suddenly, I need to call so and so. And it's inspired action. And you call so and so, and they have that job or that product or that perfect answer for you. It comes when we keep our consciousness right there. So I love nature, and I think nature's, and I say it's not the only place though, folks, because I don't people some people are in the city right now, they might say, I don't have any nature. Oh, you do. You, even if it's a spider web in the corner of the room, take the time to just notice with fascination how that spider is weaving that web. Or better yet, light. I love light, and this is my art coming in. Watch how the light comes through the window blinds and dapples on the wall. Just sit there and watch it, the beauty of it. And that's put you in that space.
Those are two great examples. I would have went with the tree on the tree lawn, but depending where you're at, some people don't have that either.
No.
Um, yeah, I can tell you that there's been many times where that light, it'll catch some kind of a prism, and you see the colors and they're sort of dancing on the wall, and they do capture your attention. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't have connected that or thought about that, even though it is something that does capture my attention at times.
Right. And you know what else? Take your camera and record it. So capture it on your camera. And then when you're feeling down, you can go back and play that little video, and it will just bring you back to center.
Oh my gosh, those are such great ways to get back to center.
Yeah.
CJ, if someone wants to work with you or connect with you, what does that look like, and how would they get a hold of you?
Oh, okay. So I have a website called spiritualartisttoday.com, and I have a blog on there. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for. I also teach art retreats. I have some here in Texas, but in next spring, 2025, I'm having a week-long retreat in Santa Fe,
Ooh,
and it's,
beautiful area.
I love Santa Fe. That's my farm on the hill, right?
Okay.
I love Santa Fe. I love the silence there. But what people do is they comment. You do not have to be an experienced artist, because I teach you from a learning set where you learn how to do collage and space, but also you learn how to shift your consciousness. And that's really what I love. How do you shift your spiritual consciousness and the consciousness of the world? So any one of those ways. And I also have a podcast myself called the Spiritual Artist Podcast, where I interview artists and people like you, which I think we're going to have to do that.
Yeah,
Because I
I'm
love
all
this
in.
conversation. Yeah, we definitely have to do that. I love all the things you're talking about. So we're going to have to flip this. But yes,
Okay.
you can listen to my podcast too.
So now I've asked all these questions, and I'm sure there's a lot of other things going on in your mind. Something that you would like to throw out there that I've not touched on? Any thoughts that you would like to leave with the listeners?
You know what? I think this is a great interview. The only thing I'm excited to do, and I don't want to open the can of worms right now, is ask you questions.
Okay.
But we're going to save that for that podcast, because I want to know how you got where you are and why you live in this wonderful rural area on a farm. I want to stretch that.
Okay. I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I love having you on the show. We have touched on some really, really important topics, and you have great wisdom. I really do love the tangible, actionable examples and things that you've put out for people that are really sort of looking for some direction, especially in these times that can feel uncertain to other people. For some of us, they feel very beautiful. If we can stay out of the chaos of it. I do a pretty good job of doing that, but I'll honestly say I'm not always out of it, just like yourself.
Mm-mm.
But it's just sort of staying more the observer and the periphery of that. So thank you very much. I appreciate your authenticity. Clearly, you've been very patient with all the electronical glitches and Mother Nature kinds of things that have gone on. And for all the listeners out there, as always, we both thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. Remember, embrace that wild soul. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wild Soul Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To learn more about our guests, please go to our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We're very eager to hear from our listeners what you thought of the episode, topics you might like us to cover in the future, your thoughts on spirituality, questions you may have. Please feel free to send us an email at wildsoulsgathering@gmail.com. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.